Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland, Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland, Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Rachel Russell. Rachel is the founder of Thrive Beyond, a coaching firm that aims to empower small business owners to define and achieve their vision of success. What's unique about Rachel is how she draws on her personal experience of juggling the responsibilities of a successful career with a busy family life to inspire her clients to make the required changes in their businesses so they can start living the life they've been striving for. And be sure to listen to the end, where Rachel shares with us some tips on recognizing our own strengths and weaknesses and how we can create a framework to get the most out of our own natural personalities. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the world of business coaching or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Rachel Russell, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Rachel, I'm really excited about this conversation because I've always been fascinated by this concept of coaching someone so they can become a better version of themselves. And I think our listeners can learn a lot from your expertise in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So Rachel, where did you grow up?
Hi, thanks, Amir. I actually grew up in Kingston, which might be a bit of a rarity for your podcast series. I now live very close to where I grew up. And I did move away for university, and in my 20s I lived in London, but I came back here before I had my children.
I don't blame you. It's a great part of the world, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what I realised living in central London. I just realised how lucky I was to have had the childhood I had of, Richmond Park, the River Thames on our doorstep, fantastic schools, everything we need within walking distance. And I really missed that, which was weird. Living in central London, you'd think you would have everything on your doorstep, but there was a huge amount that I missed. So we moved back here in 2005 and have been very happily living here. And I now have 2 children at the local schools, and my business is entirely focused in the Kingston area.
Oh, fantastic. And where did you go to university and what did you study?
So I went to university down in Brighton, which was absolutely a brilliant experience. I did a 4-year degree in business studies. So that was sort of wide-ranging qualifications, which included a year out in where I worked back in London to sort of kickstart my career so I could hit the ground running when I qualified. That's great.
And could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
Sure. As part of my degree, I had a year out in industry working in London, and that gave me a bit of exposure to the kind of thing I might be interested in. And I then qualified with business studies, and I went the well-trodden route into the city where I worked for the best part of 15 years. I ended up as head of marketing and relations. I was working initially in the Lloyd's of London financial markets and latterly in financial analytics. And I had 2 children along the way. And much as I loved my job and my career was going very, very well, it was really the balance that I struggled with of trying to maintain a career while still raising a young family. And I changed my role. So my last job before I started my own business was based in Wimbledon, thinking that would make my life easier. But of course, it didn't. So I took the leap 3 years ago now to leave the workplace entirely. And I then retrained doing 2 diplomas, one in personal performance coaching and one in small business coaching, before launching my business, Thrive Beyond. And I think that's what makes me quite different from other sort of coaches, consultants out there, is that I've got this combination of academic experience, real business qualifications, both in large and small businesses, and the coaching qualifications, which I've been able to sort of overlay in creating the programs and the methodologies that I use with my clients.
Rachel, it's interesting, your backstory there, because it's similar to mine and to some of the other interviewees we've had on the show, starting in corporate life in the City of London and then moving out to a more independent business, or actually setting up your own business, as it is in your case. Could you tell us a little bit more about what prompted you to start your business?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. Having said I studied business studies, I look back now and I think I wish I had more experience and more exposure to the options that were out there, really. At no point when I was younger, in my 20s, did I consider myself entrepreneurial, or even that I would indeed start my own business. It's something that happened very gradually when I started to look at what the priorities were in my life, what the parameters were in which I was willing and able to work, and how I could make that work. And ultimately, I went back to my values and beliefs around family, around community, around this continuing growth mindset that I have to continue learning and growing, and just that acknowledgement that it's, reinvention is something that we go through throughout our lives, and to embrace it rather than to shy away from it. I looked at the options I had, and I thought, actually, the best option for me is to start my own business, so I'm in complete control of my time. I can work flexibly, and I can make the time for my family when I need to, and also the time for my clients and my business is there too. So it's just a very well-rounded existence now.
It makes a lot of sense. So bringing this conversation to the present, could you tell us a little bit more about your business today?
Yeah, sure. So I founded Thrive Beyond around 2 years ago now as a business coaching organization, really there to empower business owners and their teams to achieve their vision. So by that, I work a lot with my clients to help them understand what success means to them, because for everybody that can be something very different. So whether it be an entrepreneurial startup or a more established business where perhaps I'm working with the team, I help them to create that vision, to understand and measure what success means to them, so ultimately they can celebrate their successes and achieve that success. I also help startups who are perhaps right at the beginning of their journey. They have a service, because primarily I work with service-based industries, and they perhaps have a service but they don't know how to go to market. So I help them understand their vision of success. I help them understand how the business is going to fit in with the rest of their life, because that's hugely important to me to create that work-life balance. And I help people ultimately with client attraction. So that's understanding the niche, their ideal customers, their marketing strategy, and help them go to market very effectively. But also because of my business experience, I also help more established businesses be more effective and efficient. So by that, I worked a lot in the outsourcing industries. So I help people understand how they can work to their greatest and really use some of the amazing businesses we have in Kingston to outsource to, which is where I love, the connections and the community that I've created here, in that I can help people to ultimately spend more time working on their business and outsource some of those things that they were previously having to focus on themselves. So it's a quite wide-ranging area of business, but it really goes into those two niches. It's the startups, and then it's the sort of the small creative type businesses, all within the Kingston area.
So there's quite a bit in that I want to unpack throughout this conversation, Rachel. Let's start with just looking at one side of the coin first, which is, what are some of the common mistakes that you see your clients making and that business coaching can help them with?
Okay, let's have a think. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think one is that people, they have a service. So perhaps I've worked with a number of different architects, a number of different virtual assistants, to name a few, some photographers, and that is their skill and that's what they do. But they will stand up at one of our networking events, or they will present themselves online as doing just that. and they're not really clear on who their ideal customer is. They don't have a clear niche. So I help people to really work out who are the kind of people they want to work with, and how can they productize their services to both meet the needs of those ideal customers. So by that, I mean, rather than, let's go back to the photographer example I said, rather than saying, I am a photographer, I photograph people, I photograph businesses, I photograph events, they will have the confidence to stand up and say, I am a personal branding photographer, helping small businesses to achieve and represent themselves. So you can see there what I've helped somebody do, go from being a generic service to be something very clearly defined that they can actively sell. The other problem that I help is with businesses that are working at capacity. So the more established businesses will be, so in architecture I was talking about earlier as well, they are a good example because they're working at capacity. They have a finite amount that they can earn because they are their business ultimately. But by doing a bit of process work, helping them map out their ways of working, what they're doing now and what they could do, I help them then to outsource to perhaps a virtual assistant, a marketing manager, an office manager, those sorts of things. And that ultimately frees up capacity for their earning potential within the business and ultimately their profitability as well.
I like that a lot, Rachel. And you talk about this power of creating a vision of your success throughout your website and throughout your social media. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. It's something that I feel very strongly about. You know, I think a lot of people go into business and they might even fall into it and they haven't actually spent the time to define what success is. And as a result, they become very disenfranchised, you know, overwhelmed, overworked, no work-life balance because they're constantly striving for the next thing. Whereas if you're clear about what success means to you and you can measure that success, then ultimately you can celebrate that success, acknowledge that success, and really have a great deal more satisfaction in your business and a greater work-life balance.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, Rachel, in my profession, I've worked with a number of people who want clarity around their personal finances because they're looking to begin a second act in their career or in their lives. And I just wanted to sort of understand from your point of view whether you see that too in the work that you do with people, especially in the comment you made a few seconds ago, which was around giving business owners the space and the mindset to work on their business rather than just doing their role within their business. Have you worked with people who are perhaps finding themselves in a slightly different career, even in their own business, after your guidance and after creating that vision?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean, you know, I've helped people to be much clearer on the direction in which they want to take their business and have the confidence in doing so. And I think that all comes down to people understanding where their strengths lie, where their passion lies, where their purpose lies. So they actually build the business around what they absolutely want to be doing and who they want to be working with. And that can take people in a very different direction. You know, I've worked with service providers such as social media managers who have previously been paid by the hour to deliver a service, who actually have been able to reinvent themselves, offering training and development to their clients. So offering social media training rather than actually doing the social media. And that has opened them up the opportunity to grow their business in a very, very different way.
That's really interesting. So let me switch gears on you slightly, Rachel. In doing some preparation for this conversation, it's clear to me that you're obviously a busy working mum and also busy with your own business. And of course, we are now living in this most unusual of times with coronavirus and the lockdown. But sort of within that and also over and above the coronavirus situation, could you give our listeners some tips, especially the working parents that are listening to us, that are perhaps feeling some pressure under this particular circumstance that we're living through? What are some of the tips that you would give them to make this work for them, their family life, and their businesses?
So that's a great question, because I think for all of us who are working parents during this time and we have our children at home, I think we need to be realistic. We need to be kinder to ourselves and realise that the parameters in which we're willing and able to work are just so different. I think, I know from my experience that it's sort of the first week I expected that I could do it all. And the reality is very different. I think it's a matter about understanding what the requirements are for you as far as homeschooling, if that's something you need to do, or indeed caring for much younger children, and where your work fits into that. And it's okay if that is less than perhaps it was prior to this time, but it's about having those realistic expectations and understanding of what you can achieve. And once you have that, my second tip really is to time block. So put those blocks of time in your diary, which are dedicated to work, and those times that are for everything else, and communicate those with the other people in your family. So I have a very open conversations at home where I'm able to say, these are the periods of time where I will be working and I need to work. How does that work with your diary? And we flex and we adapt and we make sure that we give each other the time to do the work that we need to do and be there for our children. Because ultimately, when we come out of the end of all this, the last thing I would want for my children to be just relieved that they could finally get away from this situation. Whereas, the core thing is to make sure they're happy and not distressed by what's going on right now. And indeed, we look after our own mental health as well and have that balance between our working lives and our family time that is more and more at the moment.
And Rachel, I'm guessing that in your case, your business is conducted very much on a face-to-face basis in normal circumstances. Could you tell us a little bit about how you've adapted to this new world?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I sort of designed my business, I was very clear that I wanted to focus on helping businesses within my local community and within the Kingston area. And I was doing a little bit online. So I'm also a coach mentor. So I mentor coaches in training, and that's delivered virtually. So I have got the setup and the experience of doing it, but it wasn't something that I naturally was indeed selling or doing. But as the lockdown came closer, I realised that I would need to change the way I'm operating my business. So for now, the team workshops, the facilitated workshops that I'm doing in businesses may have been postponed, but I've been able to work more and more virtually with my one-to-one clients. And I've been delighted by how well it's working. So really, rather than meeting face-to-face, I send people the workbooks. If they're doing a particular program with me, I'd send them the workbooks for the modules that we're doing together. And then we work face-to-face, but over Zoom, and it works really, really well. And as I said before about having those time blocks, I know that time that I'm booked into work, I have my space at home, I'm uninterrupted, and it gives me the headspace to focus on the clients and what they need right now. Yeah, it's been a great opportunity for people to be able to actually spend the time to work on their business. That's been really, really very interesting, is that people that are perhaps delivering a service, which is less so during this difficult time, they've actually invested the time in themselves and their business to just reassess their business. Is it the business they want it to be? What improvements can they make? Could they work more efficiently? Indeed, are they selling the products and services that they ultimately want to be doing? And just asking all those challenging questions so that when we come out the other side of it, they're the ones that are going to be ready to hit the ground running because they have a business that is set up in such a way that it works for them. It's clear on its vision, it's clear on its customers, the services, and ultimately the marketing strategy. And they are, investing that time in headspace right now gives them the benefit to hit the ground running when they can, if they can't do it right now.
Absolutely. And I've got no doubt that those businesses will be thankful for the time they took to reassess. And as you said, absolutely be better for it when we come to the other side of this coronavirus situation. Rachel, what are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
So I think for me, it's really about, firstly, being clear about what your priorities are. So your priorities, I always start with people. When they work with me, the first thing I do is I focus on you and your business. And by that, I understand, where does business fit into your life? And I think that's been a key lesson for me, because I think understanding what's going on in the rest of your life is so important to the success of your business, but also the success of your personal life. So understanding those priorities and what's negotiable, what's not negotiable, so you can really get that work-life balance in place from the start. And you can challenge yourself even when those things start to slip. So if it's really important to you that you engage with perhaps some close family members once or twice a week, and you realise that that's slipping and you're not prioritising that, it's important to challenge yourself and make sure those things happen. Secondly, I'd say be clear on the vision of the business and make sure you are in control of that vision and that vision is yours. So I think for a more established business, I have helped people create a shared vision. So where they are at a point where they might have 10 employees, get those people involved and help them create that shared vision. So you're all on the same path and you all are bought into where you're trying to take this business. But even if you're an individual starting up, I think having a clear vision of what success means to you is critical. So that if you're challenged and swayed by other influences on your business, you are able to demonstrate that you have given this some thought and you know where you want to take the business and what success will mean to you. And the last thing I'd probably say is a great lesson, and I absolutely love it when my clients share this with me, is to celebrate your success. I know working with a travel agent, it was interesting how they would say to me that they just would, they'd do a big booking, hang up the phone, deal with the next email, do another booking, and it was just this constant treadmill. There was no acknowledgement of any successes along the way. And just with some little tweaks and changes to routine, I was able to help them to add that into their process, really. So they acknowledged when they made a great success. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean going out and spending huge amounts of money or going out for a meal. It can be something as simple as taking a mindful minute to acknowledge that success, or taking, some time out from your desk to make yourself a drink and really acknowledge what you're achieving here. So just those little steps, and also those big things along the way when you are achieving those steps along the way to achieve your ultimate vision of success.
I like that a lot, Rachel, and I most definitely second the idea of celebrating successes, even if they're small. When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
That's a good question. Ultimately, I think I'm most proud of how brave I was to make the decision to leave the corporate world, to leave a well-paid job and a career in progression to build a business that ultimately has my family at the core was a really brave decision. And I'm so proud that I made that decision and I have achieved success in my business and with the additional qualifications that I've done. I think it's certainly the bravest thing I've done. As I said right at the beginning, I never particularly saw myself as an entrepreneur. And indeed, I didn't think of myself as starting my own business, but that is the route that ultimately called to me. And I followed my instinct and I've gone with it. And I'm really proud that it's proven to be a success.
That's great. Rachel, what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm working a lot with, as I said, over Zoom at the moment, helping people from startups to the more established businesses, really empowering them to achieve success. And what I've also qualified in the last year is as a DISC personality profiler. And what that means is I help people to understand their own personality and also how they can communicate most effectively with their customers, buyers, suppliers. So I'm working on, I've already delivered that one-to-one to many, many clients, and I'm looking at facilitated workshops around that as well now. So adding that to my repertoire. And yeah, just looking to take that forward. I'll be looking forward to getting some more of my group workshops booked in, which are selling very well, and taking the business forward.
And on that DISC personality profiling side of your business, Rachel, let me just unpack that a little bit, if I may, because I think our listeners can learn a lot from this. And I say this from experience, having gone through that process myself. I found it quite fascinating. Obviously, we all have our own natural strengths and weaknesses. Could you tell us a little bit about how that profiling exercise helps people identify that and perhaps do something useful with that information?
Yeah, it's really very interesting. I think ultimately, if you can identify your own personality and your own behaviours, in doing that, you start to be able to recognise that in others. And when I facilitate team workshops around this, it's all very open and you're able to understand where perhaps there are conflicts within the business, but also opportunities. There is no right or wrong. There's 4 key personality types. D for dominant, driving force. I for the more influencing, inspiring types. S for the steady, stable type, and key, conscientious, cautious. And what that's all about is understanding really where you are on that scale. We all have a blend of all of them, but it's really understanding where is your dominant and where perhaps is the dominance within the people you're working in, where those areas of conflict are that you can now understand, and how you can tailor the way that you communicate in order to be more effective. So, for example, I know if I'm working with somebody that perhaps is an S or a C, so they're slightly more introverted, they may focus more on the detail, the task, or the people involved, and they will perhaps like to work at a slightly slower pace. So by work, I mean just in our communication. And I've learned through this that, you just need to slow down and perhaps speak a little bit quieter, a little bit softer, and just take a little bit of the energy out of it. Whereas I know if I'm working with somebody that's a more extrovert, a real driver, they will want to work at a pace and they just want to get stuff done. So through doing this sort of profiling, you can adapt the way that you're working with others, and it ultimately can make you hugely successful as a result.
That's really interesting, Rachel. I appreciate you sharing that with us. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Rachel, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Quite a few things, really. I love to go to the gym. I do spinning and exercise classes, which I can't do at the moment, but I've adapted to that, really. And I'm loving getting back out, running outdoors again, which is great, and doing classes at home. And as a family, we love to get out cycling and walking and travelling together. I'm in a couple of clubs. I'm in a wine club, which is hosted at one of the local pubs in Kingston, which is great fun, and a book club with some of my local friends as well. So I keep myself very busy. My happy place is in a house full of friends and family. So at the moment, we're doing a lot of that over Zoom, and not quite the same, but we're certainly making the most of it.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Are there any books that you've recently read that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned I'm in a book club. I read so many business books over my time through, especially in the recent years, qualifying in my coaching qualifications. But for me, reading is about escapism right now. It's really about, I love a book that takes me to a different place, a different time, and I can really immerse myself in it. I read a fantastic book recently called A Gentleman in Moscow. That was absolutely fantastic. And Heart's Invisible Furies, that was John Boyne, that was excellent. And I'm also reading finally, I've had it sitting to read for a while, the Michelle Obama Becoming autobiography, which is really, really interesting, reading about her journey as a career woman and as a mother, and her role supporting Barack in his presidential campaigns, and his success and her successes along the way is really, really very interesting for me.
And are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so sure. I absolutely love going to the theatre, to the cinema, watching, Netflix very happily. I have devoured, again, it's really, I love something that's a bit of escapism that takes me somewhere different, a different time. We just watched Tiger King on Netflix, which was completely random, but completely perfect for this strange time that we're in. And, but I love, what else have I been watching recently? We devour box sets like Suits and things like that we've loved. But I also love travel programs and foodie programs that I can just really immerse myself in and really, be part of that.
That's excellent. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
So my website is thrivebeyond.co.uk. You'll find a little bit about me and the services that I have on there. You can find me on Instagram at Thrive Beyond UK. That's all one word, Thrive Beyond UK, and that's on Instagram and Facebook. And on LinkedIn, it's Rachel R. Russell. So you can find me there, and it'd be lovely to connect with many other local businesses out there.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure I add those resources on the show notes. Rachel, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed it.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.